So, how do you design an exercise program for cardiorespiratory endurance? First is the principle of overload, and that's that the heart muscle or any muscles must become overloaded to become stronger. So that means you need to do a little bit more than you did before to continue to see gains. If you just do what you always did, you're always going to have what you already got. So we need to overload, just put a little extra good stress to create improvements. So the best way to do this is with the FITT-VP principle. And just a note, you probably want to write down the word overload in FITT-VP and some notes on what this acronym stands for because they have been test questions before. So FITT-VP, first is frequency. This is how often you exercise. 3 days a week, 5 days a week, 7 days a week. Frequency is about how many times. All of these items in the FITT-VP principle are things that can be overloaded. So if you start working out, the first time you work out, you might be a little bit sore and tired the next day, so you'd probably start with lower amount of days of exercise, but over time, over the next few weeks, you're going to want to increase that. So if you start working out 3 times a week, 2 weeks from now, hopefully you work out 4 times a week or 5 times a week. Intensity is the I. Intensity is the amount of effort put into the workout. So this is when we talk about moderate intensity exercise or vigorous. One way to calculate this is by heart rate. So 40 to 60% of your max heart rate would be moderate, and 60 to 90% is vigorous. Intensity can also be thought of like a scale on from 0 to 10. How hard would you say this workout is right now? And there's actually something called a rating of perceived exertion. There's a scale from 6 to 20, where 20 would be absolute maximum effort. You are probably going to fall down because you can't go anymore. 6 would be standing up out of a chair. So if I started jogging, maybe it would be a 10. Maybe it wouldn't be a hard jog. If I started doing intervals and running hard for 2 minutes and taking a break, I might be more at 15 or 16. And this rating of perceived exertion can estimate your heart rate, because if I was at a 15 or 16, then you could add a 0 at the end and estimate that your heart rate was 150 to 160. Those are some ways you can estimate intensity with endurance exercise. Next is time. This is the length of your run or your workout. Type is what you are doing, what type of exercise, running, walking, elliptical, biking, swimming. Volume is a function of frequency, intensity, and time. So they're all related, and I'll give you more details in just a moment. And the last one is progression, and that's the concept that you're going to take any one of these factors, frequency, intensity, time, or type, and even volume to an extent, but really you're affecting volume by manipulating these 3. So you take any of these first 4 and you increase them slightly, and you just need to increase 1, and every 1 to 2 weeks, increasing something is enough to implement progression. So progression is planned overload structured into your workouts to elicit improvements. So some brief details on these factors. Intensity. To measure your heart rate, what you can do is estimate your max heart rate with this equation. Put your age in here and figure out your max heart rate. We can pretend it's 200 for this example. Then you need to know what your resting heart rate is, which we've done in lab, or you can check it for a full minute. Then take your max heart rate and subtract out your resting heart rate. So if your resting heart rate is 50 and we're estimating max heart rate 200 for the purpose of this video, then 200 minus 50 would be 150. And now I'm going to take that number, which is your heart rate reserve, HRR, and I'm going to figure out the percentages based on the heart rate reserve, because you cannot change your resting heart rate number, and so you don't want to calculate a percent based off of that. So moderate intensity is 40 to 60%. So I would suggest calculating at those two percentages. So for my example, 150 times 0.4 and 150 times 0.6. And then at the end, what you're going to do is take that number and add back in the resting heart rate to get the heart rate range if you were to do moderate or vigorous intensity. So here you can see moderate intensity is the yellow, 40 to 60% of your heart rate max is moderate intensity. Now, if you increase your heart rate even more above 60%, then you're in vigorous intensity training zone. And this will make a little bit more sense in a minute, but just so you have a reference on what exactly moderate intensity and vigorous intensity are. If you don't have a way of checking your heart rate, because then once you calculate the numbers, you can use those in your workouts. Some teams do heart rate practices where they need to be so much time in this yellow zone and so much time in the red zone or the vigorous intensity zone. And it can help with programming to know how hard you're working at different times. But if you don't calculate any of it, an easy way is the talk test. Let's say you go on a run with a friend. If you can carry on a conversation and you can at least speak in full sentences, then you're in moderate intensity. Once you get to the point where you can't really talk, maybe your friend's talking and you're like, yeah, you can say 1 or 2 words at a time, then you're probably in vigorous intensity. When you're exercising vigorously, you cannot easily speak full sentences. Type of exercise just needs to be rhythmic and continuous. So something like running, your legs are continually cycling through. Same with biking or swimming. It needs to involve major muscle groups. So your quads and your hamstrings and your trunk and your core and potentially your arms as well. And it increases your heart rate to a desired training intensity. So if you do squats, you do 10 squats and you take a break, it's probably not increasing your heart rate into that moderate or vigorous intensity. So we're talking about endurance aerobic activities right now. Examples are walking, jogging, elliptical, aerobics, cycling, etc. Time. What is recommended is 150 minutes per week, and I've mentioned that before in this class, and we will probably hear it again and write it down because it's on the test. For moderate intensity, you should work out 150 minutes per week. So that could break down into 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day. Here's the kicker. If you want to work harder, you can work out for less time. It improves your VO2 max more. That shows significant improvements for cardiorespiratory health, for your disease risk to go down, to exercise in vigorous intensity. So let's take that 5 times a week, 30 minutes. You could cut that in half. You could work out 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week for a total of 75 minutes per week. 15 minutes of hard work with your heart rate above 60%. Try it out. Figure out your heart rate zone and work out above 60%, because you might find that you can do it for 15 minutes and you get huge health benefits. I think with our crazy lives, 15 minutes sounds super doable as opposed to 30 minutes or an hour. So huge payoffs for working hard. If you want to use exercise for weight management, then the recommendation is to up the minutes to 60 moderate intensity minutes per exercise. So this would be 300 minutes per week. And same thing with this, you could cut that time in half if you upped into vigorous intensity. So you could do 30 minutes of vigorous intensity if, for the same results. It's important to warm up and cool down 5 to 10 minutes before and after. Cool down after is important because if you abruptly end a hard workout, you can cause the blood to just drop, and then it'll pool in your extremities and it'll kind of like drain out of your brain. So you could have dizziness or faintness. In the worst case scenario, cardio abnormalities. So if you work out on campus and then you walk back to your dorm, that's perfectly fine for a cool down. If you go to the gym and just immediately get in your car, I would recommend doing some kind of walking around or something to cool down to let your heart rate and blood pressure naturally lower. Frequency is recommended 3 to 5 days a week. So that 150 minutes, just try to spread that out over at least 3 days per week. If you stop working out after doing an exercise program, you can lose your VO2 max and cardiac output and gains. You can see those drop substantially within 2 weeks. So good news is you can get it back if you start working out again, but within 2 weeks, your body is already losing some of the function that you were at before. Volume. Here's a great, easy way to understand it. Volume is intensity times time. So if you go at a higher intensity, vigorous, let's say, then you can go for less time because you'll get the same volume. So vigorous intensity would be higher and time would be lower, 15 minutes, versus lower intensity, moderate, 40 to 60% of your heart rate, and normal time, 30 minutes. And the reason is that volume is really the key. So we're going for the certain amount of volume, and so you can manipulate the factors, which is intensity and time. Frequency, how many days a week you do this, also plays a role. So volume is the ultimate key, and the reason is because you can overload too much. And if your overall volume is too intense, too hard, then your body will be stressed. You'll stop seeing gains. You'll have lowered immunity, poorer quality sleep, that kind of thing. So if you do find that it is too much exercise, lower the total volume. Maybe just back off on the intensity to give your body some recovery time. Back off on the intensity a couple times a week if you're going hard all the time. So to review, FITT-VP principle is frequency, intensity, time, type, volume, and progression. Simply overload one of these factors every week or two, just by a little bit, and you will see improvements in your health and fitness.